Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BSF Canada and Syngenta Canada.
Welcome to another episode of the Soybean School here on Real Agriculture, as we are going to focus on what we've learned, what the key takeaways are from the 2024 crop. I'm pleased to be joined now by Steph Chabbert, who is with Maizex, based here in southern Manitoba, kind of the eastern side of the Canadian prairies. And Steph, when we look back at the 24 growing season, there's now snow in the field. I think it's time to kind of spend some time reflecting on what we learned. Maybe bring us up to speed in terms of what the 2024 growing season looked like here in Manitoba for our soybean crop.
Yeah, thanks, Kelvin. So we had a really good season on soybeans once again. A different season than what we're maybe used to, with a lot of slow CHU or heat buildup early on in the season, and a lot of heat later in the season to finish up those later crops, and quite a bit of moisture throughout. So I think most growers were pleased with their soybean crop, and we had great yields and great quality as well.
Yeah, that's one thing. We haven't actually seen the final crop insurance numbers yet as of when we're talking right now, but there was some talk of even a record yield in parts of the province. So I think in general it was a pretty decent soybean crop that was pulled off again in 2024 here in Manitoba. And are there certain takeaways or things that you can say that we learned from this, again, another abnormal season?
Yeah, so looking back throughout the season, I think in spring when things got, quite wet and seeding was delayed and guys were itching to get into the field, a few of the soybean acres got dropped and flipped into other crops as canola and such. And looking back throughout the year now, some growers regret that decision, as we proved to be able to grow a good soybean crop within those wet conditions and even with some of those later seeding dates. So that's maybe one of the takeaways is to hold true to that crop even in some adverse conditions.
So did we see different varieties behave differently? I know I heard one report that some areas saw more heat units in September this year than we actually saw in June, which would be abnormal. Did you notice varietal differences in terms of how they handled those growing conditions?
Yes, absolutely. Some shut down really quickly or shut down kind of as they should, and some really just seemed to hold on. And so there was some varieties that were, call it a mid-season variety that acted very late. And then there were others that came in right as they should. So not something we were really used to seeing, but absolutely, as I walk, many trials across many different companies, we did see some odd things happening in maturities.
Of course, rain in August at Podfill was huge for determining yield. Do you attribute the strong yields this year mainly to that, or are there other management decisions as well that factor into it in terms of, we've talked about one already here, planting date? Are there other things that you saw in common in terms of soybean fields or acres that performed well this year?
Yeah, so moisture is certainly the leading factor on that one. We got a couple really nice rains into August, and that, made us 10, 15 bushels likely. So those are some really key rains. Outside of that, we are seeing seeding rates declining, I would say, as an average. And this has been okay. It's very variety specific and plant architecture specific. But in some cases with some of these newer, bigger hybrids, or varieties, I should say, we're okay with dipping those seeding rates a little bit lower than what we used to have. The other, one that's the verdict is still out is the air seeder versus planter. There's lots of data that argues both sides, and once again this year I've seen many trials which we had a planter and an air seeder side by side, and no great conclusion. The year and variety determines what wins, not necessarily planter versus air seeders. So
yeah, that the visual of the plant, the 30-inch rows early in the growing season, to me always looks better, but then you get to harvest and, like you said, it's still a toss-up in many situations between the two
Yeah.
different. Another major new part of the discussion when it comes to soybeans, not just in Manitoba but across North America right now, Steph, is the arrival of new herbicide tolerance systems over the last 5 to 10 years, and including some new ones here that are just coming onto the scene now. What do you recommend for growers in terms of how we navigate all of these new herbicide tolerance systems in terms of how we manage these crops and how we integrate that into our planning for next year?
Yeah, so multiple herbicide tolerance systems on farm is something, it became new to us with Roundup Ready canola and Liberty canola, but it's going to become a lot more common as, extend, flex, enlist, and other herbicide systems come on farm within soybeans and multiple things being worked on in corn and canola as well in the background. So whether, we like it or not, the industry is going that way. And I think we just really need to do our due diligence and understand how to work with multiple systems. So even if you choose to only work with one system on farm, that's fine. But we have to be cognizant of, what our neighbors are growing, spraying conditions, really thorough clean out, things like that. And it's all things that we can do, and it's all great things to do anyways. So it's just really, yeah, we just need to take a little bit more time, a little bit of time spent speaking with, the neighbors around, making sure that we're doing things properly and not, so rushed at times. So
Yeah, and in some cases, sure, it's obviously soybeans in the field next to us, but we may actually have to kind of treat it as a different crop because of different herbicide tolerance.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, soybeans within different herbicide tolerances can be one of the most susceptible crops to the other tolerance, right? So, a non-extend bean, for example, is one of the most susceptible crops to dicamba or extend. So, very good point there.
Yeah. So in general, then, when we look back at the 24 growing season, Steph, are there things that we should specifically apply when it comes to planning for the spring season of 2025? Of course, a lot of those decisions are being made as we speak when it comes to acres for next year and which varieties to grow, that type of thing, which approaches to take. What do you recommend for growers as we plan for the 2025 growing season?
Yeah, with this season being a little bit of a different one, I mean, we every season is different in its own right, its own way. Um, but I'd really encourage guys to look at multiple data points and multiple years of data when selecting hybrids or varieties for any crop, really. With the really large buildup of heat within the fall, a lot of things are skewed or not quite what we're used to seeing. And in soybeans, we really seen it too on how some varieties matured. We had some late varieties mature early. We had some early maturity varieties kind of come in late. The industry was all over. So take some time, look at some data from 23, 22, wherever possible, and average things out. Don't get too caught up on one data point from the 24 season because it's a bit of a different one.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to the 2025 growing season. Of course, we'll enjoy the break and a little bit more office time, planning time here. In the meantime, thanks for making the time to join us here on the Soybean School today, Steph.
Yeah, thanks for having me.